Directions. Read the fictional poem Fields of Flashing Light, then answer the questions. Out of the Dust, Fields of Flashing Light by Karen Hess. I heard the wind rise and stumbled from my bed, down the stairs, out the front door, into the yard. The night sky kept flashing, lightning danced down on its spindly legs. I sensed it before I knew it was coming. I heard it, smelled it, tasted it. Dust. While Ma and Daddy slept, the dust came, tearing up fields where the winter wheat, set for harvest in June, stood helpless. I watched the plants surviving after so much drought and so much wind. I watched them fry or flatten or blow away like bits of cast-off rags. It wasn't until the dust turned toward the house like a fired locomotive and I fled, barefoot and breathless, back inside. It wasn't until the dust hissed against the windows, until it ratcheted off the roof, that Daddy woke. He ran into the storm, his overall half hooked over his union suit. Daddy, I called, you can't stop the dust. Ma told me to cover the beds, push the scattered rugs against the doors, dampen the rags around the windows. Wiping dust out of everything, she made coffee and biscuits, waiting for Daddy to come in. Sometime after 4, rubbing low on her back, Ma sank down into a chair at the kitchen table and covered her face. Daddy didn't come back for hours, not until the temperature dropped so low it brought snow. Ma and I sighed grateful, staring out at the dirty flakes, but our relief didn't last. The wind snatched that snow right off the fields, leaving behind a sea of dust, waves and waves and waves of dust, rippling across our yard. Daddy came in. He sat across from Ma and blew his nose. Mud streamed out. He coughed and spit out mud. If he had cried, his tears would have been mud too, but he didn't cry, and neither did Ma. Number 1, Part A. In Fields of Flashing Light, how does the author best demonstrate a difference between the speaker and the speaker's parents? A, by explaining how the characters feel about the wind. B, by describing how the characters respond to the wind. C, by describing how the characters prepare for the wind. D, by explaining how the characters work during the wind. Part B. Which pair of lines from the poem best supports the answer in Part A? A, I heard the wind rise and covered her face. B, I watched the plants. He ran into the storm. C, cover the beds, but our relief didn't last. D, dampen the rags around the windows, waiting for Daddy to come in. Number 2, Part A. Which statement best describes how the structure of Fields of Flashing Light allow the reader to imagine what is happening in the poem? A, short lines help the reader to focus on important images. B, long lines help the reader to understand the time period of the storm. C, the alliteration in the lines helps the reader to picture how much dust entered the house. D, the rhythm of the lines help the reader to compare the feelings of the characters. Part B. Which line from the poem best supports the answer in Part A? A, line 8, B, line 19, C, line 25, D, line 63. Read the nonfiction passage, Sifting Through the Dust, then answer the questions. Sifting Through the Dust by Roberta Baxter. The devastation to the land on the Great Plains in the 1930s was extreme. By 1934, 35 million acres on the Great Plains had lost topsoil. Another 225 million acres had suffered severe erosion. What caused such an incredible destruction? 4 ecological reasons were behind the Dust Bowl. The plowing of grasses native to the area combined with the planting of wheat served to aid in the creation of the Dust Bowl. Straight furrow plowing, along with the lack of trees to slow down the wind, allowed the moving air to pick up grains of dirt. And wheat roots did not anchor the soil as well as grass roots. They also used up nutrients in the soil each year without replenishing them. This produced long-term damage. Farm animals were another factor in the Dust Bowl. Their grazing on pasture lands pushed many more animals into smaller spaces than were available in the days of the free-ranging buffalo. During the dry years, the hungry cattle dug up grass by its roots, leaving nothing to grow or tie down the soil. There also was an extreme lack of rain. Most of the Great Plains averaged 15 to 20 inches of rain in a year. In the 1930s, however, rainfall amounts decreased markedly, sometimes down to only 1 or 2 showers worth in a year. 20 states in the Great Plains set drought records that still exist today. Farmers tended to make the situation worse by trying to offset the scarcity of rain with different dry farming methods. In their efforts to make the little rain that did fall go the furthest, farmers tried disc plowing the soil. This broke down the soil into the finest possible consistency. When rain fell, it was able to travel quickly through the soil, but when it did not, the powdery dirt was more easily picked up by the wind. Finally, there was the wind, which could blow up to 50 miles an hour for many hours. Wind was common on the Great Plains, but it worsened the drought by evaporating what little moisture there was. The result of drought plus wind was that the particles of soil were ground smaller and smaller. Try this experiment to see the difference between normal soil and soil that has been broken down into minuscule parts. Put a spoonful of sugar in your hand and blow it into a sink. Next, try the same thing with flour. Which blew more easily? The flour has finer particles, so it is lighter and easier to blow. Now you can imagine what happened to the soil in the dust bowl. The finer and lighter particles were easier for the wind to pick up and send flying. Incredibly, dust from the Great Plains fell as far away as New York City and Washington, D.C., and even onto ships in the Atlantic Ocean. As the wind picked up, the soil clouded the sky with huge dust storms that even sandblasted the paint off the sides of houses and other buildings. Visibility was reduced to zero in a black blizzard. At times, soil on the ground drifted into dunes high enough to cover a house or barn. The soil also would filter through every crack in a house. Oily rags were hung over windows and tucked under doors in an attempt to keep the dust out of the houses. After the storm, women still had to shovel piles of dirt from their floors. The tiny soil particles lodged into people's lungs, making it hard to breathe and causing dust pneumonia. Children slept with wet cloths tied over their noses and mouths. The dust even managed to get into the most tightly covered water barrels and wells. Plants that already were struggling to survive smothered under the dust. The dirt collected in the noses and eyes of the starving animals. Chickens suffocated in dust that piled up higher than their pens. Even the usually hardy jackrabbits looked scrawny and dirty. Even though the farmers' fields were ruined and their source of income gone, some struggled on, continuing to believe that one good rain would bring back good crops and prosperity. Finally, new methods of farming were introduced to reduce the wind erosion, and fortunately, in 1938, the rains returned. Number 3, Part A. Read the sentence from paragraph 1 of Sifting Through the Dust. The devastation to the land on the Great Plains in the 1930s was extreme. What does devastation mean as it is used in this sentence? A state of being ruined. B, a state of being very dry. C, a state of being overused. D, a state of being worn away. Part B. Which phrase from paragraph 1 best helps the reader understand the meaning of devastation? A, on the Great Plains. B, incredible destruction. C, ecological reasons. D, behind the Dust Bowl. Number 4, Part A. What is most likely the reason the author wrote Sifting Through the Dust? A, to persuade readers to use safe farming practices. B, to describe the problems created by the Dust Bowl. C, to inform readers about the causes of the Dust Bowl. D, to explain how easily the environment can be harmed. Part B. Which sentence from Sifting Through the Dust best supports the answer in Part A? A, the plowing of grasses native to the area combined with the planting of wheat served to aid in the creation of the Dust Bowl. B, most of the Great Plains averaged 15 to 20 inches of rain in a year. C, as the wind picked it up, the soil clouded the sky with huge dust storms that even sandblasted the paint off the sides of houses and other buildings. D, finally, new methods of farming were introduced to reduce the wind erosion. Number 5, Part A. In Sifting Through the Dust, how does the author most strongly develop the idea that disc plowing contributed to the Dust Bowl? A, by comparing the size of soil to flour. B, by listing the effects of the strong winds. C, by describing traditional farming methods. D, by explaining what damages root systems. Part B. Which sentence from Sifting Through the Dust best supports the answer in Part A? A, and wheat roots did not anchor the soil as well as grass roots. B, when rain fell, it was able to travel quickly through the soil. C, the flour has finer particles, so it is lighter and easier to blow. D, the tiny soil particles lodged in people's lungs, making it hard to breathe and causing dust pneumonia. Number 6, Part A. Which statement best explains how the poem and the article each help the reader to learn about the Dust Bowl? A. The poem shows why storms would occur while the article focuses on biographical information. B. The poem describes what one family's experience might have been like during a storm, while the article gives scientific and historical information. C. The poem focuses on where the storm took place, while the article describes the reasons people decided to stay on their farms. D. The poem explains the steps necessary for recovering after a storm, while the article emphasizes what life was like for families after the 1930s. Part B. Which detail from the poem and the article best support the answer in Part A? A. I sensed it before I knew it was coming. I heard it, smelled it, tasted it, dust. 4 ecological reasons were behind the Dust Bowl. B. Tearing up fields where the winter wheat, set for harvest in June, stood helpless. Children slept with wet cloths tied over their noses and mouths. C. It wasn't until the dust turned toward the house. Some struggled on, continuing to believe that one good rain would bring back good crops and prosperity. D. Ma told me to cover the beds. Unfortunately, in 1938, the rains returned. 7. Part A. Which sentence best states a theme of fields of flashing light? A. Determination will often lead to change. B. Difficulties await those who are unprepared. C. Knowledge is often gained through experience. D. People are sometimes powerless against nature. Part B. Which detail from fields of flashing light best support the answer in Part A? A. While Ma and Daddy slept, the dust came. B. He ran into the storm, his overalls half hooked over his union suit. Daddy, I called, you can't stop dust. C. The wind snatched that snow right off the fields, leaving behind a sea of dust. D. If he had cried, his tears would have been mud too, but he didn't cry. Number 8, Part A. In line 26 of Fields of Flashing Light, what does the phrase "like a fired locomotive" suggest about the dust? A. The dust cloud looks as frightening as a train. B. The dust is moving as fast as a train. C. The dust cloud is as large as a train. D. The dust makes the same sound as a train. Part B. Which detail from the poem best supports the answer in Part A? A. It wasn't until the dust turned toward the house. B. I fled, barefoot and breathless, back inside. C. Until it ratcheted the roof. D. That Daddy woke.